A Simplex converted to a Great Western Railway Prairie tank. This one is part 93, fitting the brake linkages and painting the cab roof. Fitting the brake linkages may seem like a simple job, but it ended up being possibly one of the most fiddly jobs I've done on the locomotive. I removed the nut that secured one of the brake arms. That allowed me to lift the entire brake block and brake arm in an upward direction. Then I fitted the brake beam in place as shown here. When I first dismantled this engine, I left the brake beam and the front pull rods in position, so that's a good thing. All I had to do once I inserted the brake beam was to retighten the nut, which holds the brake hanger and the brake block back in its normal position. This clip shows the general arrangement. The two rods connected to the brake beam connect to the second set of brake blocks, but this is a more sophisticated coupling method. Unlike on the front pair of brake hangers, in this position you can't use a crossbeam because the boiler's ashpan would not be able to be removed or fitted, and for that reason it uses a double fork system. Here's a close-up so you can see the arrangement. This was really difficult. Holding the nut in the correct position to tighten this bolt took a while. I haven't shown all the failures, just the successful one at the end. By editing out the failures, I try and make the job look relatively simple, but believe me, this took a while. I must have done it 10 times before I got the nut to engage. But oddly enough, when I fitted the nut to the other side, it was very simple, and I think the main problem was, because of the lighting, I could not see what I was doing on the top part. The nuts and bolts that I used were new 5BA nuts and bolts, and they were a little bit tight in the holes. This was really due to the thickness of the paint, but it was quite straightforward to screw the bolt into the fitting first using a socket, then just offer up the nut and tighten the whole assembly. I used quite long 5BA bolts for the middle pair of fittings, and I shortened them before I fitted them. But for connecting the rods to the operating arms, I left them full length. A lot of people get on to me about using adjustable spanners, but if you look at anyone who works on steam engines, they generally do have one in their pocket for quickly adjusting things without having to hunt for spanners. And besides which, this is a Barco spanner, very different to some other brands. I clamped the Barco spanner to the nut, and the only thing holding this in place is the pressure of the spanner's jaws against the nut. And while I think about it, in the 35 years or more I've been using Barco spanners, do you know, I've never rounded a nut with one. So despite being told that it's bad workmanship, I will continue to use my Barco spanners as usual. I ran into a minor problem. When I removed the packing that was holding the front wheels up, I noticed that the bogie frame was contacting this bolt that had just fitted. This was a quick fix. Using a diamond cutter wheel in my Proxxon motor tool, I just chopped off the excess thread. There was plenty of movement available before, but now there's a little bit more. I had to put the chassis on its side on the bench to do this job, but to prevent the paint from being marked by the bench, I used some of this stuff. I folded it into 3 thicknesses. It is of course bubble wrap. And no damage whatsoever was done to the paintwork. The chassis is now the right way up and the bubble wrap is back in my box of bubble wrap. And it's time now to see if the brakes work. The chassis rolls very freely along the bench. And as I start to screw in the brake handle, this is what happens. In no time at all, the brake shoes grab the wheels and they stop rotating. There is a bit of a major design flaw here. The running boards are made from brass, and they're not fastened to the chassis at the point where the brake shaft goes through. I think I need to make a reinforcing block or bracket to fit in this area. I'll do this very shortly, but I won't make a video about that, it's too simple. Into the outer part of the workshop now to use some HMG paints, black satin, to paint the roof. I've already painted the underside. I did that the other day as I was leaving the workshop. Now the paint is dry, I can turn the parts over to paint the top surface. This paint is absolutely brilliant to use. It gives an extremely even coating, and the finish is near to perfect. When I painted the boiler and the superstructure using Phoenix Precision Paint's Great Western Railway Green, which was also a satin paint, I didn't read the instructions on the can before I started. The instructions clearly state you must shake this for 5 minutes, but I didn't. And I paid the price by getting a very patchy finish with runs and sags in it. I showed this in an earlier episode, and I also showed how I rubbed down the paintwork and recoated it properly. And for all the paintophiles out there, here is a gratuitous shot of the paint drying in the outer part of the workshop. Try not to get too excited about this. And that is it for this episode, a nice simple one, just like a girlfriend from my dim and distant past. I'd just like to say, as I always do, stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.